Hello everyone, and welcome back to this companion to A.K. Warder's Grammar Guide, An Introduction to Pali. In this tutorial we come to lesson 29, where we look at the intensive secondary verb derivation, the conditional mood and conditional clauses, as well as clearing up some rare declensions. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. So, I think we'll begin with the conditional. Although often referred to as a tense, the conditional is possibly better understood as a mood, based on the future verb stem. Thus, if we look at how it's formed, we first take a future stem, and these were covered in lesson 10. And to this, an augment is routinely prefixed, unless the stem already has a prefix. Then one of the thematic aorist endings, similar to those of dis that we saw in lesson 11, is applied. The term conditional normally means to express a condition, as in, if they were. But as Warder mentions in a footnote, the conditional mood is so called mainly due to the similarity in this morphology to Latin and Greek, and is too wide for how this verb is actually used. And that's because the conditional verb in Pali is restricted to expressing something unfulfilled, unfeasible, or untrue. To better understand this, we must return to subordinate clauses that we saw in lesson 27. A conditional clause is another type of subordinate clause, like a relative clause, and is used in an if-then sense. If the condition in the subclause is met, then the consequence in the main clause results. If you study, you will learn. In Pali, a conditional clause is often introduced by a conditional conjunctive term, such as sakhā, the enclitic particle che, which usually comes second in its clause, or the adverb yadi. Okay, now conditional sentences in Pali can be grouped by the degree of uncertainty expressed by the mood of the verbs. For instance, when the condition and the consequence are expressing a certainty, the verbs in the two clauses are usually in the present indicative mood. If there's some uncertainty, but it's probable, often the future tense is used. The optative mood indicates something possible, or something which is conjectural, hypothetical or unsure, but still feasible. Finally, if the statement is unfulfilled or unfeasible, then the conditional mood verb that we've just seen is used. And sometimes these types of statements do not require a conditional conjunctive term. Just the mere use of the verbal mood is enough to mark the conditional nature of the clause. And although there's a tendency for both clauses to take the same verbal mood, they can vary as required. Occasionally, even the imperative mood is used to express injunctions or requests. So it's easy to get confused around all the different ways the term conditional is used, but hopefully now you can see the difference between a conditional conjunctive, a conditional verbal mood, and a conditional clause. Okay, so now let us return to the secondary verbal derivative known as the intensive, but more usually in English grammar it's called a frequentive. These types of terms imply that the action is done repeatedly or intensely. They're words like to crackle, clatter, or flutter in English. And in Pali they can be recognized by the fact that the verbal root is duplicated. To this reduplicated root, a thematic A can be added, and also sometimes ya is added to form the stem. And then these inflect in the normal way. And some adjectives are formed in this way too. Now the rules for this duplication are complex, but as the instances of this type of verb are few, they can be merely learned by heart. Next, Warder presents an irregular aorist form of the verb labh, to obtain. Besides the regular aorist that we saw in Lesson 4, there's also a less common form on the irregular stem lat that takes the augment and the thematic aorist endings. And finally, there's an unusual noun stem, go, meaning a cow, that ends in o. I think this is the only one, and it has similar forms in both the masculine and feminine declensions. Lastly, Warder adds the declension of sakhā, friend, which is a mixture of the I and R noun stem declensions. And that, my friends, brings Lesson 29 to a close. There's a link in the description below to translations for the exercises. And in the next and final lesson of this series, we consider the desiderative secondary verb and the root aorist forms. Until then, of course, please check out my other tutorials and my blog.